What is up, guys? Bobgar here, and today we're going to take a look at a 10 Tix Modern Landfall ramp deck. I don't know how good this deck is, but I think it's a lot of fun, and I wanted to play with some cards that don't see a lot of play elsewhere. I mean, that's part of the fun of playing a modern, a budget deck, rather. It's like you get to play with some of these cards that, like, they don't quite make it in mainstream tier 1 or 2 modern decks, but in this kind of tier 3 or 4 range where we can, like, take wins off of some people, you get to play some interesting cards. So we're gonna take a look at this deck, and yeah, I think it's gonna be pretty cool. We're gonna start off with the actual ramp. So these are the cards that get us more lands explicitly, because we're looking for land triggers, not just normal ramp. That's the reason we're not running Mana Dorks or Utopia Sprawls and things like that you use to enchant lands. We actually want more lands, and we're gonna start off with Search for Tomorrow. That's our kind of 1-drop mana ramp. You can play it for 3 if you want. It finds land out of your deck, basic land out of your deck, and brings it into play untapped on your side. Or you can pay 1 mana and suspend 2. So this comes out on turn 3, and it does the same effect. Just it takes an extra couple turns to do it. So a very good 1-drop for us. Our 2-drops. Well, if you play Search for Tomorrow turn 1, one of your best 2-drops is Colony Heart Expedition, because you'll get the counter on it from Search for Tomorrow. Colony Heart Expedition is a little bit of a weird one. It reads, Landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on Colony Heart Expedition, and once it has 3 or more counters on it, you can sacrifice it, search for your library for 2 basic lands, and put them into play tapped. So a 2-drop that technically gets us 3 land when it goes off, and we'll be able to trigger it pretty quickly. Even in the late game, it's not the best. It's not a good top deck. It's a bad top deck, but we have ways to even trigger it as a top deck late game, so it's not as bad as it looks. So yeah, pretty good at just getting us a lot of lane triggers quickly. And we can also, if we know we're going to hit our payoffs, we can also just sit on it till we play our payoffs and then break it. So it lets us build up these payoffs, which is kind of nice. Secura Tri-Belter is one of the classic land ramp cards. Put it out. It can chump block for a turn, and you can sack it to search your library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. So late game, it just gets you a land trigger. And early game, it ramps you towards your big payoffs if you know you need it. So yeah, generally just a pretty good card. And then only 2 of the last one, Cultivate. A little bit like Colony Heart Expedition in the sense that it grabs you 2 lands. 1 goes directly into the battlefield. 1 comes into your hand. It is 3 mana, so it's our most expensive mana ramp, but it's also pretty good. It fixes us, does all the things we want. Then we're going to talk about some kind of enabler creatures. Some of these are payoffs, especially Tireless Tracker is a payoff card. But all of them kind of fill the role of making it so that we can get land triggers in the mid and late game and have stuff to do with our mana, basically, all this mana that we've generated. So Ramonap Excavator is super powerful because it lets us play lands from our graveyard. So even though we may run out of lands in hand to play to keep triggering landfall, we can start bringing them back from the graveyard. And we have a bunch of lands that will be able to be played from our, well, basically we'll go to our graveyard so we can replay them. Such things like Evolving Wilds, and I think, oh god, what's it called? The new Ruins card that comes out that lets you destroy a land. So things like that. Keep getting them back and make sure you can trigger landfall every turn. And with things like Evolving Wilds, you get to trigger it twice a turn. So you basically, once he's out, as long as you've used 1 Evolving Wilds, you can trigger landfall twice every turn. So that's the reason he's kind of an engine card in our deck. And he also just helps us hit our land drops if we're missing them for some reason. As long as we have 1 Evolving Wild, we can keep getting lands back to make sure we hit more, keep ramping ourselves up. Tireless Tracker. This guy is a threat in his own right. So he's just very good in the deck as just a 3/2 that grows. But he also generates us these clue tokens, and these clue tokens draw us cards. So he turns these land drop cards that we get in the late game, like Secura Tri-Belter. If we're threat light and we have a Tireless Tracker on the field, that Secura Tri-Belter turns into a redraw that also makes our Tireless Tracker bigger. So basically, the fact that he turns our land drops into redraws is pretty powerful and really helps us push through the mid game towards the late game. And then finally, Mina and Den Wildborn. I had Azusa in this slot for a while, but I actually decided I liked Mina and Den better. So the reason I like it more is not only does it let you play additional lands on your turn, which combos very well with Ramonap Excavator if you have, for instance, an Evolving Wild in your graveyard. It also has the ability to pay 2 mana to return a card from the battlefield to your hand, and then you can replay it. So it's another way to keep generating these landfall triggers that are useful to us. As we're seeing with Tireless Tracker, it gets us clues, and it's also going to get us more creatures and things like that as we look at the other cards in the deck, the payoff cards. So being able to do that is super valuable to us. And so that's the reason I like it. It's also a 4/4 instead of a 1/2. Can just fight through and win games on its own, is a serious threat on its own. And so yeah, I like this card quite a bit in the deck. It's a little bit of a weird one, but a 4/4 for 4 is never terrible, and its abilities are very, very relevant to this specific deck. All right, so those are kind of our facilitating the land synergies cards, I guess is what I called it. And so they're kind of, like I said, our enablers a little bit. And then we look at the payoff cards. So there's 4 different payoffs. We're running 4 Dragon Master Outcast. This is the one nice because you can bring it in pretty early. It's super cheap. And then as we ramp to more lands, it'll start going off like we want it to. It's just a 1/1 for 1, but as long as you have 6 or more lands on the battlefield, you put out a 5/5 flying dragon creature token on each of your upkeeps. So a little hard to stick. It dies to all the removal, but if you stick this for a turn, you get a 5/5. If you stick it for multiple turns, you're going to start getting tons and tons of creatures. Nice because one of the big problems with the deck is we're playing such big things that things like Remand just wreck us, and having something like Dragon Master Outcast where we can be like, we try to play our big thing and we also slip out of Dragon Master Outcast can really help us push through in games. And yeah, it's just a super efficient threat. 1 mana is a really good deal for a deck like this, for a card that will take over games. I tried to play around with some scoop mobs in the 1-drop slot too, and I just found them a little bit lackluster compared to something like Dragon Master Outcast, just because they're just always going to be one creature you can kill, where as long as you trigger Dragon Master Outcast once, your opponent really needs a sweeper to stop you from getting on that roll and just taking over the game. Dungreveld is a little bit of a weird one. It was a little bit of a late add, but we run almost all forests. I think 4 of our 23 land cards are not forests, but mostly forests, and each of those forests gives this thing 1+1 power and toughness. And the fact that it's hexproof is super good. But yeah, in a land ramp deck where we're going to get 7 or 8 lands out by turn 5, this thing just becomes an unbeatable threat. One of the best feelings in the world when I was testing this deck is my opponent played down a Tarmogoyf. It was a pretty late game, obviously, but they played down a Tarmogoyf, and it was like 6/7, I think, and I already had an 8/8 Dungravelder out, and it was like, oh, well, you're at 6 mana. I guess your Tarmogoyf is a chump blocker. So yeah, things like that end up feeling pretty good. Definitely can outscale most modern creatures in the late game, and it's hard to remove. You basically need a sweeper. It is a go tall threat, so if your opponent has a bunch of threats, they can just get around it. It is a little hard to grow it faster than, say, like Death Shadow, but in the realm of relatively cheap creatures, it grows big really fast, and because of the hexproof, it's really hard to remove, so I like this card a lot in the deck. And then kind of the 2 really big landfall trigger creatures. 3 Rampaging Payoffs. I mean, this is kind of the card that drove me to make the deck. This got downshifted to rare in Iconic Masters, and it's, super cheap. It was super cheap before, but now it's even cheaper. And yeah, it's really cool. It's a 6/6 trample for 6, which is not the best rate, but it's okay. And then it has this landfall ability where whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 4/4 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. A lot of times, we'll not only want to play this, we'll want to combo off with it. We'll like already have a Colony Heart Expedition on the battlefield and charged. We'll have like an Evolving Wild either in our hand or ready to go, or a Random Map Excavator on the battlefield to bring one of those back. And so we can just like play this down, turn 4 or 5, and then just instantly get 4 or 5 triggers with it too. And suddenly we have, 26 power with it. I guess that wouldn't be 26. That would be like 22, I think. Doesn't matter. So you get the idea. And the same thing is true with the last card. We're only running 2 of it. 1 because it's legendary, and 2 because it costs 7 mana, which even with all our ramp is a little hard to get 7 mana. Omnath Locus of Rage is super cool. It's a 5/5 instead of a 6/6, which is a little sucky, but it does 2 things that are cooler. It produces 5/5s, so these landfall triggers are a little bit more valuable on it. And whenever it or another elemental on your team dies, you get to do 3 damage to target creature or player. So that, again, is super valuable. You can shoot down your enemy's creatures that were threatening you if they have removal on it. Even go to face if it's going to win you the game or something. Super cool card. And those are all the payoffs. That's basically our payoff block. Basically, most of them are like really go big payoffs. Dragon Master Outcast, Rampaging Payoffs, and Omnath are they're a little hard to stick because they're going to get removed a lot. Fortunately, the last 2 at least don't die to Fatal Push. And then Dungravelder is our stickiest threat just because you can't Fatal Push it, you can't path it, you can't do anything to it really other than sweep the board. So that one at least sticks around and definitely can win us some games too. All right, so that's the payoffs. Let's look at the interaction. This slide is easy. There's only 1 card, Lightning Bolt. We're running it as a 4 of. It's just really the only interaction we have access to and the only good interaction we have access to. Basically helps sustain against aggro. Occasionally helps against combo too if they're like a creature combo deck. And that's basically its role in the deck. I mean, I guess occasionally you can go face and kill somebody. It's a very flexible, very efficient Magic card. We don't run a lot of mountains, so it can be a little hard in that respect. Sometimes we don't get it turned on until turn 2 or 3, but I like it a lot in the deck. I think it's very good, and we're running 4 of that. And then the lands. So we're going to start with the non-basics. We're running... Oh, I think I said we were running 4 non... Oh, yeah, we are running... No, we're running... I lied. We're running 6 non-forests, but... Well, I guess we're running 10 non-forests, but 6 of those fetch us for forests. We're only running 4 non-forests that don't also fetch us for forests. A little off topic. 2 Cinderglades. Really good fixing in our deck. We want forests and mountains. The only reason we don't run all 4 is because we want a good density of cards that we can fetch for. Basics we can fetch for, rather, because most of our cards fetch for basics. 2 Raging Ravines. Raging Ravine is a little bit expensive in paper. So in paper, it might make sense to cut it. Either replace it with something like Treetop Village or just replace it with more basics, or more Cinderglades actually would be fine too. But yeah, I wanted it in the online version because online it's like 50 cents and it makes us a lot more threat dense. One of the problems with ramp decks is you're a little not that threat dense. We're pretty threat dense for a ramp deck, but still it's nice to have a couple lands that are also active creatures to just push our threat count up a little bit. Then 2 Field of Ruins. It's nice to be able to run this in the main board. It gives us additional land triggers because we play it, we can sack it, and then we search again to find another land. So it gives us 2 triggers, a little bit like Evolving Wilds. And it also can shut down our opponent's main lands and can shut down their Eldrazi Temple or Tron pieces and things like that. Sometimes it can take out Valakuts. So in there for that kind of thing. We can play the Strip Mine game if our opponent only has a few basics in their deck and we get this plus random map excavators out. I don't think our deck's usually going to grind that far. I think most games of Modern just end before then, but if we got into that grinding matchup and we felt like that could win us the game, we could slowly start taking all the basics out of our opponent's deck as well. So those are all the kind of non-basic lands. I guess there's one non-basic land on the next slide, Evolving Wilds, but these are all basics or things we can fetch with Evolving Wilds. 11 forests. Like I said, that's kind of the big one. 2 mountains, and then 4 Evolving Wilds to help us find the lands we need and to also just generate a lot of those triggers. So that's what our land base looks like. Pretty simple. And then moving on to the sideboard, running 2 Ghost Quarters. Good way to remove important enemy lands. Sometimes we just want to up our count from the ruins. 3 Tormod's Crypt, get rid of graveyards. If we're playing against a heavy graveyard deck like Dredge, these obviously come in. 2 Ancient Grudge really help us in the affinity matchup. The affinity matchup, you really need a lot of artifact removal. And Ancient Grudge is a really good one. We couple that with 3 Destructive Revelry. This is in just because we can hit red-green pretty easily, and it's nice, flexible, instant speed, does a little bit of extra damage. The extra damage isn't super important to us, but 2 mana destroy target artifact or enchantment is a fine rate. So it puts us in pretty good position. 2 Dragon Claw. This is in, kind of against mono red. We can get run over by aggro pretty easily. We have a chance to stabilize, but we definitely can just get run over by some aggro decks if we don't hit our correct threats and things like that. And just gaining a land every time they cast a red spell helps a lot. And we play quite a few red spells too, so it also gains us some life off our own red spells. And then finally, Pyroclasm. Deal 2 damage to each creature. Obviously against things like tokens or decks that just run a full set of Birds of Paradise plus Noble Hierarch, things like that. Help us stay in the game early and take out some of the smaller threats that might be on the field. And so that's the deck. Here it is in total, about $11 on Magic Online. $90 in paper. You can down that to about $70, I believe. If you take out the Raging Ravines, I think those are about $10 a piece. And there's some other budget cuts you can kind of make in paper. I bet you get this down to 15 stuff. It'd be a pretty good deck pretty easily. Like I said, I'm a little worried about this deck. I'm not sure how all of our matchups are. I think most of them are okay, but none of them are great. Like, I don't think there's any deck that's like, we obviously beat this deck. I think our best matchups are probably the mid-range grindy ones because they give us enough time to get set up. And even the mid-range grindy decks, a lot of them, you go, oh, I'm taking 1 damage and getting an extra fatal push every turn off of my Dark Confidant. And we're like, okay, well, we put out 4/4s every turn. I think combo is probably our worst matchup just because we don't have a lot of interaction with them other than Lightning Bolt. And a lot of combo decks just don't even care about Lightning Bolt. It does slow down things like Storm a little bit. If there's a creature combo deck, a lot of times one of the creatures will be susceptible to Lightning Bolt. So it can be okay for that. And then aggro is just a little too slow to stop a lot of the time. And things like Tron, the super big mana decks, again, they have a lot of sweepers and things like that that can kind of screw us up, especially Tron sweeps. You know, all of our non-land permanents, things like Colony Expedition get swept off too, and yeah, it can be a little rough. It's not the worst matchup just because a lot of our power is in the lands we get, and those stick around. But yeah, I suspect we don't have good matchups against really anybody except maybe mid-range, and we have a few bad matchups. But I think the deck will do okay. I suspect to take 2 or 3 wins out of the 5 matches I'll play. In my practice matches, I didn't win too many matches, but I won quite a few games, and I kind of feel like it's going to be the same. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up 1-4 or 2-3, but I'm hoping for 3-2. We'll see. All right, well, I think that's going to be it. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.